All right, guys, welcome back. We have got a new toy game. We're going to take a quick look at a condensed in position range with traps versus a linear out of position range. So the linear out of position range looks exactly the same as all the other ones. It's aces through fours, not super interesting. The in position range, however, is quite different. Okay, so the condensed range is actually tighter, or like it's not tighter, sorry, but more condensed. So it's now jacks through sevens, as opposed to queens through sixes. So it's quite the middling component of this range. And the trap is obviously aces. It's the nuts. Okay, so we've got a trap there. We've got all the bet sizes enabled, and we've got a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio. So go ahead, give it some thought. How do you think the out of position strategy will behave? What kind of bet sizes get deployed? How does this situation differ from other situations? Should the out of position player check? What happens? Go ahead, jot down your thoughts, write down what kind of bet sizing you think is appropriate. Pause the video, etc. Okay, so I haven't looked at this yet, but what I think is going to happen is there's going to be shoving still because we're only jamming for 1x pot. So yes, it's true. The in position range is uncapped. It has the nuts. But that's true. It's only it's only aces, and the rest of the range is, strictly speaking, behind a large subset of combos in the out of position range, so that aces and kings and queens are the nuts, and jacks is the hand that ties for the strongest hand in the in position player's range. So you'll probably be able to jam these hands quite a bit, but of course I do think you'll be using smaller sizings also, because I think hands like tens, nines may want to bet and choose small sizings. Maybe not nines, but okay, let's go ahead and take a quick look at what happens for the out of position player. Okay, so just like I said, I hadn't looked at this. I said maybe not nines at the last, at the last second. So nines is gonna check. It's pretty. When I go back here, nines is gonna cut itself more than it's going to get value, right? It's going to lose to aces, jacks, and tens. It's only going to get value from eights and sevens. So nines was a hand that was kind of nonsensical as far as betting goes, but I didn't realize that until I looked at the ranges again. So we're value betting tens plus. We're seeing a very important behavior pattern emerge that's very consistent with our other sims, which is that tens and jacks, which are two hands that get, well, let's just start with, let's start from the very top and work our way down. So the nuts is our aces, kings, and queens. We're seeing that they're behaving in our predictable way, which is that they're jamming, but they're also checking sometimes. They have a flexible action profile. They're betting small, they're jamming, and they're checking with an emphasis for sure on shove. Okay, our inflexible action profile is coming from the hands that get a lot of value if they bet, but don't really want to check raise at all. And those hands are jacks and tens, and they just bet. Okay, yes, it's true that they choose multiple sizing choices, but they just bet, right? It's important that these hands don't check. Then we have our bluff catching hands, which are nines and eights. Keep in mind the bottom of the in position player's range is sevens, so eights is literally just one pip up from that. So this hand is almost like the in position player's bluffs, but it beats those bluffs, so it's a bluff catcher. And that's true about eights, and to a lesser extent, it's true about nines. And nines, as we explained, loses to more than half of the in position player's range. So it's not really a hand you want to be doing betting with yourself. From there, we can move on to the bluffs in this range. And the bluffs in this range would be more specifically fours, fives, and sixes, and to a lesser extent, sevens. Fours, fives, and sixes are the hands that have no chopping equity whatsoever. They are below the bottom of the in position player's range. The bottom of the in position player's range is sevens. But sevens is a hand that's probably not going to have much EV in the check option. And the reason for that is because whenever the in position player does in fact bet, the in position player will be bluffing with sevens. So it won't go check, check, and sevens won't chop very often because sevens won't be a very heavily weighted combo in the in position player's check option. And so sevens is being converted to a bluff pretty often, and just like almost as often as sixes, fives, and fours. Okay. So in this way, we've got our nut combos at the top, our hands that win very often but aren't capable of check raising and should just bet all the time, our bluff catchers, and our bluffs. Okay, and with that, we can take a quick look at what the in position strategy looks like. All right, so now we've got the in position player's strategy here, and first thing that stands out, very clean. I mean, we're either shoving or we're not. I mean, there's no like 1% here or 2, it's just shove or don't shove. Really simple. The hands that are being jammed are aces, which is the nuts. So that's pretty obvious. And then jacks, which is the strongest hand in this player's range. Keeping in mind also that the vast majority of hands that beat pocket jacks were in fact bet by the out of position player. But it's also important to keep in mind that, you can't be too intimidated from betting a hand like pocket jacks here. In this model, the opponent does in fact still have a weight on aces and kings and queens, right? So that would be a very intimidating thing for a human player. It's like, oh, there are a bunch of ways I can lose. It's like, yes, that's true. there are a bunch of ways you can lose, but this hand still gets enough value to justify jamming. And how do we kind of think about that? Well, if we jam, our opponent's going to defend 50% of their range, and it's kind of like the question is kind of like, how does jacks stack up against 50% of the opponent's checking range? And evidently, jacks is getting a lot of value under those circumstances, which means it's getting called by substantially more worse hands than it is better ones. Okay, and okay, so the other thing to take a quick look at, which is very elegant in this model, is we've got our perfect 2-to-1 value to bluff ratio. So 2 value bets, aces and jacks, 1 bluff, sevens, very easy. And so we've got that perfect ratio. We've talked a lot about where that comes from. So we don't need to do that, but I do think when it's a nice clean illustration, it's worth mentioning. And then the in position player is checking kind of medium strength hands. Obviously, 8s and 9s are the most obvious bluff catching hands. And then 10s in this instance is also or I said bluff catching hands, but really just showdown value hands, hands with a lot of EV in the check option that can't really justify betting very easily. It's a little bit interesting that jacks and aces are pure shoves and 10s doesn't bet half pot or something, right? Like, that's an interesting phenomenon. But it's nothing more than interesting. We've got a clean strategy, and we can go ahead and take a look at the versus bet strategy now. All right, guys, we're going to start with the versus bet strategy for out of position, and it's because I'm a wimp and I want to keep it simple. So we've got 1 bet size, so we don't have to look at anything else. It's important to understand what the percentages are going to look like. So keep in mind how this player's range for the out of position player is shaped, right? So in position is bluffing with 7s and value betting aces and jacks, right? So we should expect a few things. One, we know that the out of position player is going to have aces, kings, and queens, but they're going to be at modest weights. That's why we're value betting jacks. So that means that we're going to get called by 10s at a full weight, presumably, and a fraction of pocket 9s, or 10s close to a full weight, and a fraction of pocket 9s. They're pretty much identical hands in this instance. They both beat value bets, and they both lose to value bets and beat bluffs. So 10s and 9s are similar hands. So I mean, like, there'll be a subtle fold percentage with pocket 10s, but you'd rather call with pocket 10s just because it helps hold back your opponent from value betting even more thinly, like value betting you down with pocket 10s if it's already value betting you with pocket jacks. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2, the bottom of the so this is what the in position player's range looks like. So 7s is the bluff, and the out of position player here has 4s, 5s, and 6s. As a result of that, we are expecting elevated fold percentage because, as we've talked about previously, the out of position player will be defending 50% of the hands, given our bet size here of pot. Out of position will be defending 50% of hands that beat bluffs. So 4s, 5s, and 6s will be discounted from the range. As a result, we will expect a really high fold percentage in total, but again, only a 50% fold from the 8s plus region. So go ahead and take a look at that. And you can see, like, we pure fold 7s and below. Of course, calling with 6s would be pretty insane considering you don't even beat the bluffs your opponent's choosing. And so when we evaluate the range, we were evaluating 8s, 9s. There is no 10s. Sorry, 10s was a purely bet hand. 8s, 9s, queens, kings, and aces. And in that context, jacks looks like a pretty thin value bet, to be honest. But of course, these combos are very modestly weighted, which is why you always have to remember that. When I first look at this, I have to pause almost because I'm like, here we go, and then and let me just like refresh my thoughts. But these combos are, and you can see it graphically. these are slivers of combos. Okay, they're not fully weighted combos. Keep in mind that the graphic's not perfect when you're dealing with like the way that this toy game is set up. The illustrative component of these is not ideal, but there's a substantial weighting difference at this point in the hand for pocket nines and pocket eights relative to aces, kings, and queens. So that most of the range for the out of position player is in fact nines and eights. We can actually go back, and that's actually a great way to take a look at it. Is just go back very quickly and look at what the out of position player did as a better. Okay, so as a better, the out of position player checked nines and eights at full weights, 100% checks, and of course aces was only a 20% check. So if if we just assume that these are approximately 20%, this is basically 60% of one of these combos that's being checked, and this is 100% of nines and 100% of eights. So we have a little bit more than 1.5x the weighting of aces, kings, and queens in pocket nines alone. And then we also have pocket eights as the out of position player. So of course, even though these hands look like visually like smaller fractions of the range because they're being folded so much and these hands are being purely called, they're not. And that's the reason why jacks is still able to jam. Okay. So I know this can be a bit confusing optically. So that's why I wanted to go back and take a look at it that way. So, all right. And with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the in position versus bet strategy. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick look at the versus bet strategy for in position. Before we do that, I think it's important to just get a quick understanding of what we're going to look at. We are going to look at both the pot size bets and the alternative bet sizes. And so before I break those down, I want to make sure that you have a grasp of what combos go where. So aces is never betting half pot. Of course, half pot is actually chosen, but aces is never actually betting half pot. Neither is kings because they're identical hands in this instance, and neither is aces is not an identical hand because aces splits with aces for in position. Keep that in mind, right? The in position player can in fact have aces. They've got the trap, right? So kings and queens are actually identical hands here. Okay, kings and queens are identical hands in that the opponent has aces or jacks, basically, right? So kings and queens, same hand. But aces is not betting half pot. Kings is not betting half pot. Queens is not betting half pot. Okay, so this half pot sizing choice is really just jacks. Okay, and a little bit of tens. So this half pot sizing choice to some extent is capped, which also is an important idea because some people think that you can't have ranges, like you don't want to design a capped range. Some people really, they think like, oh, you can't design if you have aces, you have to put it in there. It's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You just have to defend the range if you get jammed on. So we're going to take a look at that. But this half pot range is capped. It does not have aces, kings, or queens in it. Aces is betting pot, or it's betting like to a 30% or a 10% size. Okay. Yeah, so I did want to just briefly mention that as we kind of run things through because you're gonna see. I did run this one through beforehand, and because I almost made a mistake in the last one, so I ran this one through beforehand just to make sure that I knew what was going on. So we're gonna go ahead and see the benefit of some of those ideas. And okay, so what happens? Start off with betting pot. And when we bet pot, we're expecting a 50% defend. We've talked a lot about that, so we're not going to discuss it. If we saw more than a 50% defend, then we would have, thought about where the bluffs come from and things like that. But we're getting our 50% defend, which makes sense because the out of position player is bluffing from below primarily, right? Below the in position player's range. So, so we're looking at defending 50% of the range, and so. Okay, so that works, that jives. We're in a world that we understand, which is great. Aces doesn't fold, it's nuts, makes sense. Jacks is pure call, and then keep in mind that the in position player or out of position player is value betting jacks. Nope, not to pot. So this is a purely weighted call just below the start of the out of position player's range, but it is the top of the in position player's range. And I've mentioned this before, but calling with the hand that's just below the bottom of your opponent's value betting range in priority relative to the other ones makes sense because if you did it in a reverse order, for example, if instead you called with jacks at a 10% weight and called with eights at a 90% weight, or call it eights at a 99% weight, your opponent would start jamming jacks on you, right? So of course, calling with the hand that's just below the bottom of your opponent's value betting range, which in this instance is actually queens, to pot size. You help, what you do is you make it so that queens is actually the bottom of the value betting range. Or again, if you were to call with further down, then there would be incremental additions to the bottom of the value betting range. So this does make sense. Once we get below jacks, though, I do think that like 10s through 8s are pretty much almost identical hands. They beat bluffs, they lose to value bets. Yeah, it doesn't need much more explaining like that than that for the pot size. We can go ahead and take a look at the half pot size now. And again, keep in mind that the half pot size here is capped. So we're expecting two things here. We're expecting aces to, before we look at it, we're expecting aces to jam on us because it's nuts. That's pretty obvious. It's going to jam on all the sizing choices, right? So aces is going to shove, and then jacks is going to be indifferent between shove and call. And why is jacks indifferent? Because this range doesn't have queens, kings, races in it, right? This range is just capped. It's just jacks. So if we jam jacks, we get called by jacks, right? We can take a look at it. If we jam jacks, there's no aces, kings, or queens in this range. We just get called by jacks. Okay, and so that makes sense. So we've got the half pot strategy there with jacks. We can see the fold is 33%, which also makes sense for half pot. Again, we've talked a lot about this. 67% defend, 33% fold, very predictable. Aces jams. Yeah, and the bluff catcher is bluff catcher essentially. Against half pot, there's a lot of pocket tens in this range. Okay, and so the in position player is not folding the hands in the opponent's value betting range. So in position is not folding pocket tens. It's a good rule of thumb there. And yeah, I think that we can go ahead and now investigate 30%, which is another commonly chosen sizing choice here. So again, like just because we haven't really done as many calculations for 30% and what the full percentage is expected to be. So we're expecting the full percentage against 30% to be 23% fold and 77% defend. Again, that's just 30, which is the bet divided by the total pot after the bet. 23% fold is our expectation. Let's go ahead and take a look at what happens. We get 23% fold, very elegant, very clean, very nice. Against the 30% sizing choice, we can take a look at what hands are in this. There's a lot of jacks, there's a lot of tens, and then there's some bluffs, and there's a little bit of pocket aces. Okay. So what happens now is if there's a lot of jacks and tens, jacks is jamming quite a bit. Aces is obviously still the nuts. We have some bluffs that offset. We just call tens. Okay. We'll go ahead and take a look at the jam, and if in position jams on this 30% size, tens does have to defend a little bit. Okay, and we can lastly take a quick look at the 10% size, and you can just see that all the way down there's quite a high VPIP. I mean, pocket eights is the full percentage here at 9% is also predictable, by the way. It's just 10 over 110, so 10 over 110. I don't know why my calculator is not cooperating. There we go. 9% fold. Hey, look, 9% fold. So that means you got to call a lot, got to raise a lot, got to be aggressive. Aces and jacks jamming, eights and sevens bluffing, and eights is mixing between the three options of call, shove, and fold. Sevens is shoving or folding. Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm comfortable with this one, and we can go ahead and stop it and move on to the next SPR.